Okay, good evening again. We are here on July 7th, and we are doing a Q&A session for those who are homeschooling and going to keep going, and just wherever the conversation takes us, we'll let the Holy Spirit guide. So before we do that, let's pray a prayer together. This is for the protection of our children. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Mother Mary, by virtue of your divine motherhood, you have become mother of us all. I place the dear ones God has given me under your loving protection. Be a protecting mother to my children. Guard their bodies and keep their thoughts ever holy in the sight of their Creator and God. Guard their hearts and keep them pure and strong and happy in the love of God. Guard always their souls and preserve in them faithfully the glorious image of God they received in baptism. Always, Mother, protect them and keep them under your motherly care. Supply in your all-wise motherhood for my poor human deficiencies and protect them from all evil. Amen. Queen of the most holy family, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. That's one of my morning prayers because I really need that part where it says, Mary, will you please make up for my deficiencies? I need that prayer daily because none of us are perfect, right? So let's decide where to start. Let's start with the philosophy question on having an ideal and then settling into what will work for your family. I think the question was, 4 different kids. Maybe Charlotte Mason sounds ideal, but classical also sounds ideal. How do I manage that with 4 kids? Amy, do you want to give your thoughts before we open it up?
Sure. So some would argue that classical is Charlotte Mason or Charlotte Mason is classical, so they're not necessarily two distinct things. I think they really play together really well because they both build on what the kid is capable of doing and their natural zones of learning kind of. So I don't know that those two things are mutually exclusive. I think they go together really well. I think maybe focus on two different things. One more so than the other. I think Charlotte Mason focuses on the natural world and nature walks and things like that. And to me, classical seems more bookwork, but it doesn't have to be that way. I think that's just sometimes how they're promoted. So I think those two go together really well. I don't know that you have to exclude one from the other. They go together and dovetail very, very well. And then how to manage those two things, was that the other part of the question?
Yeah, just how to make it work for a bunch of different kids.
Okay, so I try to combine things as much as I can. Specifically, science and history works well for us. If we can have everybody doing the same time period in history, which works great with classical and Charlotte Mason, you can do the living books for Charlotte Mason. You can, with classicals, a lot of programs break it up into ancient, Middle Ages, early modern and modern, or US history and modern. So if I can get all of my kids during the same time period, even if they're doing different books, my brain doesn't have to go in 4 different directions. It's mostly in one and it just stretches a little bit, which makes my life a little bit easier. And same thing with science. You could do physics or chemistry or biology. And again, stretch that a little bit to meet the needs of your youngest and your oldest. But if everybody's doing the same type of content, it just makes it easier to plan and for your brain not to have to stretch in 4 different directions. One of the people that Jenny and I like to listen to, Pam Barnhill, she talks about the difference between skill areas and content areas. And when it's a skill area, you have to meet the kid where they're at. Your kindergartner is not going to be at the same level as your high schooler in math because they don't have that basic information. And that's the same for lots of different skill levels, for reading, for math, for grammar, things like that. But content areas, things like science and history, you can combine those and it doesn't matter what level your kids are at because you can all learn different things or all learn the same thing at different levels because it's not based on needing prior knowledge. It helps, but it's not absolutely necessary. If you haven't studied the ancient times and you go into US history, that's not going to be a problem for any of the kids. You don't need a prior knowledge to do content areas like you do skill areas. So skill areas, you just have to build on where your kids are. So if you can differentiate that with your kids, what content areas can you do together on what skill type subjects do you need to differentiate. For example, in our house, everybody has their own math, everybody has their own literature, but we can combine the science and history and things like that. So that's one way that we found to simplify it in our home that's worked well. And then another thing that, and I know Jenny does this too, is a morning basket, where you can kind of plug in the little things that are lovely and enjoyable for everyone, or not, like poetry or Shakespeare. I have kids who love it, I have kids who hate it, but they're still doing it anyways. And so you can do that, everybody together in the morning, and that's just something that it's just a lovely way to start the day, and make sure you get in those things that are beautiful but don't always necessarily fit in a pigeonholed subject area.
Yes. Awesome. You made me think of a couple things while you were talking that I'll touch on, and I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to call on Britta and ask you to answer Jacqueline's question. But two things come to mind. One is that the more I homeschool, the longer I homeschool, the less important it is for me to figure out my philosophy. Like, I just look at what resources are going to work for us, and whatever those resources philosophy is, that's great. I don't feel the need to label myself one or the other, pick and choose, because it's more about what's going to work for us in this season of life. And so I've looked at all the philosophies, kind of studied a little bit about them, so I understand them, and I know I can apply various concepts. Like an example is Charlotte Mason is big on short lessons. I'm big on short lessons no matter what material we use. Even if it's a textbook that Charlotte Mason would never have used, I still do short lessons. So in general, I know what things that work for us, and the philosophy is more about what resources I'm drawn to rather than I'm following this. And the second thing about that is that, related is, when you're doing multiple kids, this is kind of a big thing now, everybody's talking about it. If you are choosing one set curriculum, it is harder to combine kids. If you are following, Mother Divine Grace, or you're following Seton especially, it's really hard to combine kids because it's just not built that way. The people who created the curriculum didn't build it that way. Now, can you do it? Sure, you can figure that out and spend the time to go in and kind of just pick and choose and modify, but then you're making your own curriculum basically, or at least substituting out some of those subjects, like Amy said, the content stuff, and kind of combining kids, and that's totally good too. So that's another way to do it. And then what's happening more commonly now is there are people trying to write curricula that is designed for multi-age use. And it seems to be kind of a newer phenomenon in the past 5 years, maybe 10 years if you get, really early on, but really more popular in the past 5 years, where people are trying to write curriculum that teaches everybody at the same time, which is fantastic, but it's all very new. So nobody's done it and graduated somebody yet. Nobody's done it and can prove this is, great. So I know you mentioned it's hard to find reviews on some of these programs like Salt and Light, which sounds wonderful. It's just because they're just not, it hasn't been around that long. I do know Kathy Duffy asked to review Salt and Light and was not yet given the opportunity. So maybe the writer didn't feel like it was ready enough to be reviewed. So that's another, you know, facet there. So those are my two thoughts, is that the philosophy and identifying it isn't as important as figuring out what's going to work for your kids this year in this season, and go for it and to continue studying those things. And then the combining kids is really something there's not very much written for yet, or if there is, it's brand new, and we have to kind of figure out what will work. So Jacqueline specifically asks about Salt and Light, and Britta has used it or is using it. So why don't you tell us what you love, what you think could be improved, how it works for you guys.
Okay, so I absolutely love it. I think she did a great job. If you haven't seen it, I'm just happened to sit in my homeschool room, so I picked it up. You can get a digital form, or you can get the real book. And actually, when you purchase the book, you get the digital form too. It's really helpful. The aspects of it I love is her religion and her history. And so I have kind of put religion and history into a morning basket in the morning. And so if you don't know her curriculum very well, she uses the Church Rocks. And then depending on the age of your kid, the St. Joseph Baltimore Catechism. And then, depending on the age level of your kid, you pick the correct catechism for their grade level in their reading. And then you're learning about saints through the Young People's Book of Saints. And then you're praying the rosary and listening to the Bible throughout each quarter. And she does different parts of the Bible, like New Testament and Old Testament, during different semesters of the year. So that part of it is my favorite. Literacy is very relaxed, and being a former teacher, I wanted it to be a little bit more not relaxed.
Sure.
So I added I love her ideas of books that she let's see, I'll get one out. I love the books that she has ideas for. So like My Side of the Mountain is a great book for a middle school kid, but just reading the book, I wanted a little bit thicker education while reading, right? So I do novel studies, and then I just buy them on Teacher by Teacher. And then, so I add that. That's something that is really important to me. Spelling is embedded in the curriculum as you're reading. And then as they're reading their books, or as you're reading a Bible verse, or there's a dictation section in there. And my middle schooler is doing the dictation and using those as spelling words. So all of that is embedded, which is really nice. So then you're not buying an additional spelling curriculum. So those are the aspects I've liked. This year, I'm actually going to try her herbal studies. Have you seen that in her thing? So you go out into the wilderness and you go and pick different things out there. And I am not, this is very different for me. So it's totally interesting. Absolutely. So that's our elective this year. I didn't do it last year. I was a little scared, and now I've read through the book myself. And so we're going to try it. So we're doing that part this year. So those are the things I like.
Britta, are you on year 1, year 2, year 3? Which year are you guys on?
So year 1, she kind of started halfway through the school year.
Okay.
So year 1. Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of in the middle.
Okay.
So,
She doesn't have year 2 for sale yet, does she?
Right. She's going to open it up in August. She was supposed to do it in July, and then she moved. And moving
that would
was
delay
stressful,
things.
She couldn't do it. So she's selling it in August. So then I can use it in January. So I'll finish up year 1. Yeah. So.
And I think I read you do have to add your own math program, right?
Yeah, I use Matthew C.
Yep.
And so.
Okay. Just since the question was, what do you need to add to it? I want to make sure we said math has to be added. Awesome. Well, and I think it's important to recognize the purpose of that curriculum is to be minimalist. So it is going to seem like less work than maybe you want your kids to be doing. It might be adequate, but you can always, I think sometimes it's good to start with the minimum and then
absolutely
add what your focuses are. So, and we, and it depends how you do things and what will work. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Britta. I really wish she had sample pages.
Right.
On her website. I don't know if you sounds like you may have contact with her. That would be so helpful to so many of us.
And the reason why I do is because she did do like a YouTube. She did a YouTube tutorial, and I don't know if it's up anymore, but it was like right when it was coming out. So I saw it like in January. So I don't know if it's still up, but she did do, like, she went through every single page in that YouTube video. So check out her YouTube video. Yeah.
That's good to know. Okay. See, I'm a read it rather than watch it. So I don't usually look at those, but you're right. Those are good. Awesome. Well, and there are other similar curricula that are not Catholic that lots of people use and just add the Catholic component. So there's Gather Round, I think is popular. I feel like there's another one.
Yeah.
But anyway, besides good and beautiful, which we talked about in the group, but so those are all things that are evolving. Like I feel like they're still growing, those curricula, which is awesome. Good, thank you. Okay, let's hit, we kind of touched on doing more than one student, but it was in the format of Charlotte Mason and Classical, and we did talk about that in the group today, but I want to address that again because Amy and I had a good chat about that earlier, a brief but good chat, because that is the question. How do you teach multiple ages, right? Because you're teaching all different grade levels, all in one room schoolhouse kind of style, and the question is, how in the world do you do that? And Amy and I kind of agreed upon an answer. Do you want to tell them, Amy, what we said?
Sure. The answer is you can try a lot of different things, and some will work and some won't. And every year slash month slash week slash day, you have to try something new because your school is changing and your kids are changing and you are changing, and it never stays the same. I have tried the big kids watch the little kids. That did not work until we were 10 years in, and I had big kids old enough to entertain little kids. We have done preschool, where I sent my preschool age kid to an actual preschool, which people thought was ridiculous. Like, why do you homeschool if you send your kid to preschool? And my friend told another friend, she goes, so she can do school. And they're like, oh, and it all made sense. It was great. It was perfect for him. It was a great social outlet and an academic outlet for him, and gave us time to get our work done. It worked out perfectly. We have tried, setting up different stations throughout the house and rotating through, like kid A gets Magna-Tiles and kid B gets, Legos, and kid C gets mom time. We have tried, please go entertain yourself while I work with the kid, and you just work yourself from the bottom up, and you start with the youngest kid and you work up. Every year it's something different, and every year the thing that did consistently work was preschool, but I know that's really not an option for everyone, especially this year. So you could just kind of have to keep trying a bunch of different things and just keep poking it and figure out what works, and then know you're going to have to change it shortly after you got it to work.
Yep, pretty much what we said. Because yeah, there's lots of great ideas on how to do it, combine subjects and take turns and do all that, but it only works, so long. My year was, I have the two big kids are high schoolers now. They kind of go off and do their own work after morning basket, but my two younger ones, like I sit between them and they're each at a table and they take turns, and I work with this kid on one subject while the other one either goofs off or does a subject if I'm lucky, and then I switch to the other kid. Okay, it's your turn. What do you want to do next? And then we work, and then they're goofing off or maybe working. So then I just go back and forth. I've been known to sit on the floor and have one person doing a math lesson on one side of me and one person doing spelling dictation on the other side of me, and I just go back and forth. I haven't figured out how to do more than two at once though, so that's just my limit. But it's a juggling act, and it is, I think, when Amy and I were chatting about it, I think what stuck in my head too is that it's an attitude that we as moms have to take on, that this is what it is. There's not a magic solution. There is not a trick to getting everybody, cooperating fully in our day, going super wonderfully smoothly every day. Some things will work for a week, a month, a year at a time, and then it has to change and be flexible. So I think the is it Sarah McKenzie says the work, no, the problem is the work.
Problem is the work.
Like we think that the work is doing all the things, but really whatever problem comes up, that's the work. That's what we're called to figure out and do and tackle and take care of right then and there. So that's kind of my biggest thing, is just remembering that in my mind that, okay, this is hard. It's not going to change, but do my best for my kids. Anybody else have tips on doing more than one student and how that we haven't mentioned that works? I think we've kind of covered most of the big ones. Awesome. All right. Do you do every subject every day, Amy?
No, I don't think so.
You don't
Most
know.
of the time, and part of that's like my little kids, they only have 4 subjects, so they're not doing every subject every day because they don't have all the subjects, because that's how I maintain my sanity. The little kids do the 4 hours and that's it. As they get older, they'll do more, but it's also varied. I have my older kids doing online classes, but I stagger them out. So they will watch the class one day and then do work through the rest of the week, and a lot of them end with a quiz. But if they finish the work on day 3, then they won't have work for that class on day 4, or if they take the quiz early, they won't have it on day 5. I know a lot of people will split up science and history again, and they might do a semester each, like really focus hard on science in the fall, really focus on history in the spring. That's one way to do it. Or they're switch off weeks or switch off semesters. I know when I taught in school, we did not do science and history every day. We switched back and forth. I taught history, the teacher across the hall taught science, and we'd flip our kids back and forth, and they went back and forth every day. We could get to it in the afternoon. So it's nice if you can, but it's not imperative that you do. And depending on your kids' ages and what subjects you're doing, it may not work out to do them every day.
That's a good point. Good point. So because I do short lessons, I would say we probably touch on most subjects each day, but it's in a different way. So like, so our history program, we're reading a textbook or we're listening to an audiobook, and we're reading a read aloud, and the kid's reading an independent book. So like one of those things is going to happen each day, and it's all history, but it's not like we're doing the same thing every day. So there's some novelty in breaking it up. The core subjects we do every day in elementary years, and then the other subjects are definitely not every day. Like we'll do, music appreciation once a week in morning basket, and art appreciation once a week in morning basket, and poetry once a week in morning basket, or something like that. I divide up for my boys their written stuff. So like they do copy work one day, but then that same day they're not going to write for me a sentence or paragraph or whatever composition thing we're doing. That would be the next day. So I do split things up that way. My high schoolers, though, they can do it whatever they want. And so they do sometimes, depending on the season, choose to do every subject every day, and sometimes they don't. I give them their work a week at a time. So I say, here's all the stuff due Friday. Go figure it out. And they get like planner sheets and stuff, and they have to fill it in so I can see they're actually going to, they have a plan to get it all done by Friday. And I've seen them experiment with that, which is kind of fun, where they've done like just all history in one day and a little math, and then, all something else in one day. And then I've seen them go through seasons where they just want to hit a little bit of each thing every day so that it doesn't fall off. So it's interesting to watch them experiment with that. So I guess my answer is yes and no. Some things are every subject every day, and some aren't. Yeah, those high schoolers, they need independence, and they need to learn how to manage their time so they can head to college and do that. So that helps them feel mature too, I think, like give them that responsibility. Cool. Okay, let's go to the question about teachers and being a classroom teacher, and how that has helped you, and what things you had to unlearn to be able to homeschool. Amy, you want to tell us?
So what helped? What's really great about having been a former teacher is that you're familiar with the teacher guides, you're familiar with how to make a lesson plan, you're familiar with what is important to get through, and you recognize that it's okay if you don't finish the book, even though myself really wants to do that. And it's okay if you don't get everything done in a lesson as scheduled. Like, that life happens just like it did in the school. If you have a fire drill, you're not going to sit there and hang out and finish the reading lesson. You're going to leave. The same thing happens when the baby is screaming or whatever. You need to stop and take care of that urgent need. So I think that helped a lot. What was a hindrance was thinking I needed to do school at home. Like, I kept the posters I had in my classroom. I finally ditched one the other day. I do not need a poster of the presidents of the United States in my home. I don't. That's really not that important. I don't know why I kept it for the last 15 years, but I had one. So it was also extremely out of date. But anyways, like, you don't need those things. I like having a beautiful US map or a beautiful world map and some beautiful pictures to bring that beauty in. And yes, I see yours. That's what reminded me, Britta. But you don't need all the things and all the busyness and those things. It also, what I don't know if it was a help or a hindrance, is you're used to everyone doing the same thing at the same time. as a school. And I guess in some ways that's a hindrance, because in my head I still really want them all to be doing math at the same time, just so my brain doesn't have to handle math and literature and science and social studies simultaneously. My brain can't do that. So I did experiment with that once, and I said, okay, everybody's doing math for the first hour, which worked for about the first 20 minutes. But we tried it. So yeah, there's definitely advantages and there's definite disadvantages. And a lot of times they talk about how when you pull a kid from school, you have to do some deschooling. And I think former teachers totally have to do that too. Like, you're not beholden to the specific curriculum. It's okay to make that curriculum work for you, even more so than you did when you were in the classroom. And you're not beholden to the administrator, but it's a good idea to ask your husband how he thinks you're doing and what you might need to work on. So those are some things to just keep in mind. And there's some definite advantages, but there are some definite disadvantages where you have to unlearn those things, just like your kids did if they were in school.
Awesome. I totally agree. And I know Britta was like, yes, on the, you know what a lesson plan is, and you know what a teacher manual is, and you know how to work through that. And you can schedule things on a lesson plan, like each day know how much is appropriate and reasonable. That's why people who aren't teachers and are just starting out homeschooling, I'm always like, just pick a set curriculum your first year, because you need to see what that looks like and learn what a lesson plan is.
Mm-hmm.
So benefits are that I knew a lot. I was a secondary language arts teacher, so I knew all the good books, and I knew how important reading and writing was foundationally to my kids. So like starting out, that was easy for me to stick to. It was a benefit that I had confidence in my ability to teach my kids, because I had a degree and a certification. I now, looking back, don't think that means anything for a homeschool mom teacher, and I question even what it means for classroom teachers these days, but we'll leave that alone. But at least it gave me that confidence to not feel like, oh my gosh, can I not do this? Because I know a lot of moms, really do wonder. And now I feel like it's more about me knowing my kids, because I know my kids better than anybody else, and that gives me the confidence to homeschool more so than my education or certification. The biggest drawback for me was not being beholden to a clock. So I taught in secondary education. So the bells rang every 50 minutes and we changed classes every 50 minutes. And so I really felt like I had to have some semblance of that in my life when I was teaching a 5-year-old with a 3-year-old in tow. And that was a disaster. Because like you said, life happens, interruptions happen, the baby screams, you got to deal with it. So the clock thing was a big holdup for me. Just the general things. I pretty much learned early on they didn't have to sit at a desk, but there are still some things where I just have to okay, I still tried to really get the handwriting and math and things that required writing at a desk, and now I'm a little more flexible with a clipboard or the floor. you know, classroom management as far as knowing that they're paying attention to you. For me, that meant they had to look at me, but I learned that, okay, well, if they're hanging upside down from the couch and afterwards we can have a conversation and they understood and can prove that they were listening, I'll allow it. So those kinds of things, I had to just get out of my teacher mentality and not be quite so rigid in that structure, I guess, was for me. And then I think too, I still, after 13 years, keep looking for the ideal. And I forget that I'm teaching people who are, just need to be treated as individuals and as people. And it's okay that I make sacrifices in my ideal to preserve the relationship between me and those people. So I constantly have to remind myself that it is not about finishing that math lesson if there is a complete meltdown going on, or, it is not about getting through to the end of the book, like you said, Amy, if there are other things in life that need to take priority. Yes, the ideal is so hard to escape, Jacqueline. I'm still working on it. I probably always will, because I just constantly remember that it's about love. It's the priority of loving those people into who God wants them to become. So that's my teacher transition. Britta, I know you've been nodding a lot and you have this experience. Do you have anything to add in your transition?
Yeah, my transition was very similar. I mean, trying to keep it just like school, and my kids were the same way. They were in school, in public school, and so it was very, very different for us to get into the groove. And on top of it, we live with my 9-year-old dad who has dementia, so I have that. There's a constant interruption, which is like a part of our rituals and routines, that it's okay that we have interruptions and you know what to do and all that stuff. So yeah, the clock was a major issue. And I teach private violin lessons, and my first year I just thought that I could, oh well, homeschooling doesn't take as long, and so I can have all of my lessons in the afternoon and I'll be fine. But then I would stress out about time, and then, worrying if I was going to get everything done with them before I had to teach my private students. And, that was before COVID, and I was driving to my lessons and all that stuff. So oh man, I was stressed out at the beginning. And then I figured out, okay, instead of doing time, okay, just have a plan for the day. And yeah, so it got better. but it was a struggle right at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because my kids never went to a classroom setting school, a brick and mortar school, so they didn't have the preconceived notions that I did. And if they had, maybe they would have been more like, oh yeah, we're supposed to sit in a desk. But they were looking at me like, why do I have to sit there? I don't understand. I can do it just fine over here, So
Yeah.
that's fun.
First day they sat at their desks, and then by like week 3, they don't even sit them anymore. Like they're still here. They don't sit it.
They collect the stuff, right?
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, whenever people talk about schoolrooms, I'm like, you mean a school stuff room? Like
That's right.
you have to have a space where all the stuff belongs, but you don't really have to do school in that room. You just have to have a place to put all the stuff.
Exactly.
Awesome. Lisette, anything to add, or Jacqueline to add that you've been wondering or wanting to share? I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Well,
Math.
I'm not a teacher. I don't have a teacher
Yeah.
background. So, but I did have experience with the e-learning. And oh my goodness. It was hard at first because of, dealing with different teachers and everything, and everyone was different, their style and how they wanted things done. And I didn't like the pressure of, it had to be, done at a certain time by 3. And I was like, oh gosh. So it was hard. It was hard. But I have worked with kids. I've done youth ministry, and then also I taught art. But in general, it was more, I taught us like a style or an artist's technique for a month, and then just broke it down by age.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have much with lesson plans. So I think I have to go more, like how you said, stick with one that has all the lessons planned, so I could see how it is, get my feet wet for the first year, and then go from there.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, it is. All of us have a learning curve because, most of us went to school, right? So went to a brick and mortar school. So that's kind of our understanding. And so to transition that into the teacher mode, into the homeschool mode, takes some shifting, and it lasts a long time. It's not just for new homeschoolers, right? Awesome.
Yes, and that was another thing too, because the teacher, I remember one of the teachers gave my daughter like sheets of math, like it was like 5 or 6 sheets, and I was just like, oh my goodness. And then I was, I knew she understood what was going on, but it was just so much work. And then I was like, you know what, the teacher's not collecting this, okay. I just took it out. I'm like, she's not gonna know. It's like, why so many sheets?
That reminds me of something else that was hard for me, switching from classroom to homeschool mom, is there wasn't a department chair, because I was responsible to a department chair that I could go to and say, hey, I don't know what to do with this part of my lessons or this part of the curriculum, and I don't know if we should do this or not, or what would work and what would not. Like, I didn't, as a homeschool mom, I have fellow moms I could go to, but not someone who was like an expert in that subject using that exact curriculum that I could, be like, what should I do in this situation? um, and so that was tricky for me in the beginning because I was like, it's all up to me, and it stressed me out a lot because it's all on your shoulders as mom, is like doing it all, right. And if you do have lesson plans or a curriculum provider to fall back on, or a consultant of some kind to fall back on, you can get that input, but it's still kind of your ultimate decision. It's not like you can be fired for not following the directions. So when you mentioned like just throwing out that paper, it made me think of that. It was just like, yeah, because to me, I was like, okay, well, am I going to get in trouble if I don't teach my kid this? And it's like, oh, wait, it's up to me.
Yeah. That's exactly, I was like, wait a minute. It was my second grader had more math homework than my fifth grader.
Oh my
And it was
gosh.
just so long. It was taking her over like an hour. And I was like, and then she had to go online and do more. And I was like,
Oh, God bless those teachers. They were trying to come up with a situation that they had no
yeah.
training and no support and very little training and upfront, like, this is how you do this. They just kind of came up with it on their own. So I know it looked very different for everybody. Boo, COVID-19 busy work. Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's what they were trying to do, just help us keep them busy. It was just too much for one subject, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard too from families who's pulled kids from a school environment that their kids, because homeschooling doesn't tend to take usually as long as a full school day, sometimes kids have trouble knowing what to do with that other time. Like they have to learn how to play or explore and entertain themselves. Yes. So they have to have that like learning of, so that's another reason why unschooling or deschooling, deschooling is recommended, is like, okay, now you have to figure out what are you going to do, for the rest of your day that's not destroying things or attacking your siblings or whatever. So yes, those poor teachers making it up as they went, and they're still, some of them having to do that for next year. So God bless them. They are doing noble things. Many of them, although there were stories of some that just were like, meh, I don't know what I'm not really going to do much, which is sad too on the other end of it. Awesome. Jacqueline, you said that you had some questions and thoughts. Are you there?
Yeah. My question was about, it sounds like a couple of you have moved your kids from regular school to homeschooling, and I'm looking at the math curriculums, and I actually used Math UC with a junior high student that I taught just math for about 4 years, and I loved it, but I don't know that I can make it work going from regular math curriculum to like the master, because and then so I'm toying with Singapore.
Okay.
But I didn't know if anybody thought one was better than the other to go from the traditional school model into, or which one translates the best into higher classes. Like I have a fifth grader who's really good at math, and like she might be bordering on ready for pre-algebra. So I just needed some advice on that.
Well, you're on the right call, because Amy does Singapore and I do Math UC, and I think Britta said she uses Math UC. Go ahead, Amy.
Do you know what program they're using at the school now, Jacqueline, that's working well for your fifth grader?
Well, actually my kids hate the curriculum.
Fair enough.
And I do too, but I think it's taught them, but they just advance a lot faster than it's Go Math.
Okay.
And there's so much, like, I know there's merit to it, but there's so much like, explain why you're doing this. And like, for me, someone who loves math stuff, and I get it, it just makes me want to like tear the book in half. I'm like, I don't know how to say it in words. I can do it with the numbers. And that's how my kids are. And so I'm like, when we were doing their assignments that they got over the COVID stuff, I was like, cross out any that say explain. You don't have to do that. Because they would be in tears. You know, they'd have the right answer, but they're like, I just do it.
So yeah, like you said, Amy, that's definitely Common Core, is explaining why those numbers do those things. So let me speak briefly to Matthew C, and then I'll let Amy give you the Singapore what's what. First of all, they're all good math programs. Like, you're not gonna, just because you pick one over the other isn't gonna be bad. There are other math programs that are also very good. Maybe not Go Math, no. But from a Matthew C perspective, with the things that you said, first of all, as far as transitioning from maybe mastery to, from Spiral to a mastery program, there's an assessment or placement test on the Matthew C website that's super helpful with figuring out where your kid needs to be. So I mentioned that. Also, I don't believe, as much as Matthew C puts a focus on this is a mastery program, there's still Spiral in there. They don't abandon review, and they don't, let go of that completely. So people criticize it because they're like, it's mastery, there's no review. I'm like, yeah, there's plenty of review. So I'll say that as well. So transitioning, there's going to be all of that. There's going to be that difference, but the benefit of the focus on being more on mastery is that you can adapt the book a lot more to your kids' needs, and they can go a whole lot faster or a whole lot slower than a normal textbook would. So some programs are set up to do that besides just Matthew C, but Matthew C definitely is, and some really aren't. Some, like, if you miss pages, you're missing concepts. So the way Matthew C is set up, for those who don't know, is that you have a lesson, and there are, in the early grades, 6 pages plus a test that go with each lesson. Pages A, B, and C are practice problems for the new concept that you're learning, and pages D, E, and F are review everything you've learned up to that point, and they also include the new lesson stuff. And there's also, they've added a G page, which is for like enrichment gifted kind of challenge questions, and then you have a test. So for us, what we've settled into, and I've used Matthew C for 13 years now, so we've settled into, we watched the video, which I think is super beneficial of Matthew C, is that we can watch Mr. Demi teach the math lesson and I don't have to teach it. My kids like that, especially in the older grades, because they can go back and rewatch it if they're struggling with a lesson. And it takes my time, like I don't have to continually explain to them. So they watch the lesson and do page A on the first day. If it is crazy easy for them and they make 100% on page A, I don't make them do page B, and we go straight to D. I don't make them do page C unless they are really, really struggling. So usually they'll do A and maybe miss 1 or 2. Then they'll do B and maybe miss 1 or 2. And then we go straight to D, which is a review page. And if they don't miss any on D, they don't have to do E. So like, I can move quicker, or we can do more pages and we can add in C and F if they need more practice and more review on that concept. So I really like that it's segregated out that way for slowing down or speeding up. And then that's also why they're not labeled first grade, second grade, third grade, because they want you to be able to do that. They want you to be able to move faster or slower. Do we use the manipulatives? Absolutely. My kids use the manipulatives like at least through middle school, and then they kind of like drop off using them. But in every video, even if my kids aren't holding the manipulatives, the video is showing them, and Mr. Demi always uses the manipulatives all the way through high school math. And so they're still picturing visually what's happening with the math, which fulfills that explain why it works. So they don't have to explain why it works, but they are being shown. So like your Common Core thing about explain why this, works. They still understand it, but they are not required to dictate, why does this 2 + 2 = 4? So those are the things that I would say about Matthew C, is that it would be a fine transition. If you do the placement test, you can move faster or slower. The videos are really helpful in the older grades, and it's just a neat approach to math that works well with a lot of kids of different intellectual abilities. So like I have one kid who struggles with math, will always struggle with math, and she goes much slower than everybody else. I have another kid who is a math whiz, and he flies through stuff, and he's going to get to the, do all of the books by the time he graduates high school, and she's just kind of going to stop at algebra 2. So there's that as well, that you can the kids who do really well and can be challenged, especially now that they've added those enrichment pages, those really help them like think and challenge them. So I'll turn it over to Amy for Singapore, but if something comes up with Matthew C, we can go back to Britta and see if she has anything to add. Amy?
So we've always used Singapore. There is a placement test on their website as well to see where your kid fits in with their program. It tends to run about a semester ahead of regular school. So if your kid is in fifth grade and they test into 4B or 4A, don't freak out. That's another thing. So Singapore has an A part and a B part. Usually A is the first part of the year and B is the second part of the year. And there is a textbook where you have like the models and parts that you read, a workbook that your kid writes in and does work in. And then there's also a home instructor guide if you do the standards version, the primary version, because there's the standards version and then there's dimensions. Dimensions is their new one that's Common Core. So if you hate the explain why you got that, don't get dimensions, do the primary US standards edition. So you would basically, for a year, you'd have 6 books. They do offer challenging word problems as an additional book. And there's another one like extra practice problems. I don't buy those unless I find them at like half price books on sale just to have on hand, because sometimes my kids do need extra practice. I have yet to have a kid need to do the challenging word problem, so I haven't bought that one. The disadvantage to going the primary standards edition is that it only goes up to grade 6. Dimension goes all the way through grade 8. So what some people do is they switch over from grade 6 in the standards edition and go straight into dimensions, and they don't have a problem. Some people have said it was way too different and it didn't work for their kids. But by the time they finish level 6, they really are ready for pre-algebra, and some kids are even ready for algebra. We skipped and went to algebra. I should not have done that with this particular child. So second child, first guinea pig child. Second child, we made sure to do pre-algebra, we just went with a different program. There are no videos. It is on you. So this is something I have to keep into account when we talked about making your curriculum work for you at the beginning of the call. I know that I'm going to have to teach math to 4 different kids, and that I will have to be supervising math for 4 different kids. So keeping that in mind, and that's a good chunk of my day, I have to go easy on other subjects to help it balance out. So I have to have stuff for the other subjects that's more they can do it themselves, or it's open and go and doesn't require a lot of thought on my end to make sure that we can get it done. They're very thorough. I have kids who like math. I have kids who don't like math, but they know their math. I'm very impressed with the program. One of the things that Singapore gets dinged on is that there's not a lot of fact review, especially in like grades 1, 2, and 3, but that's a pretty easy thing to supplement with just getting speed drills online or trying a program like Extra Math, which they can do on the computer. That hasn't been a problem. We have had to slow down for every single kid in the 2nd grade book just to get them up to speed on those math facts, but that's okay because we're homeschooling, so it doesn't matter. There's a lot of years we don't finish the book. Doesn't matter. We just start next year where we finished off the prior year. So my 7th grader finished up the book 6 and started pre-algebra in the same year. My next year 5th grader will finish up the 4th grade books. Book 4B will do 5A and we'll probably get into 5B and possibly finish it. So it just depends on where you are, and don't feel like you're behind. It's okay, because again, they tend to run a little bit ahead, so you might end up being right where you need to be. It is important that, because it is such a different way of teaching it, that if you have a kid that's borderline between like level 1 and level 2, I'd definitely start with level 1, just because it is such a different way of doing it, that you're going to want that practice on how to instruct them with their model and on the words that they use. Like, they don't use fact families, they use what they call number bonds, but it's the same thing. If it would help you, I found out recently that Hillsdale College has some videos on how to use Singapore's math, like how to use their bar models and how to use all this. They have like a whole page of instructional videos on how to use Singapore, and they really like it, which I was thrilled to find that. I wish I'd had it 10 years ago. But it's been a really solid program for us. I really like it. Another one, if you just have little kids, that's been fantastic, is Math with Confidence by Kate Snow. She only has kindergarten out right now. we did the first grade program last year. It was amazing. It was a good mastery program with a lot of review built in, and it was wonderful. It's up there for me with Singapore. It was just absolutely well done, and it's great for little kids because she knows that they need games and activities and short lessons, and it was just perfect for that.
Cool.
So.
Very, very cool. You reminded me one thing I didn't add about Matthew C. when you said Singapore gets dinged. So Matthew C. gets dinged on standardized tests because it's a mastery program and not really lined up with most of the traditionally minded textbooks. If your kids have to, or if you choose to have them take standardized tests of any kind, it's likely that they'll be kind of off on the math. Not like severely, it doesn't, we've done it from time to time and it doesn't make it like a huge, like they're failing, but there's going to be stuff on there that they just haven't gotten to yet because they spend a whole year on addition and a whole year on subtraction and a whole year on multiplication and a whole year on division. They don't learn multiplication until the third book at all, which is not usual in those early grades. But as long as you go into it knowing that, and to my knowledge, the states that require standardized testing don't actually like require that they pass it. They just require that you take it. Which is kind of weird to me, but I guess they don't want all the checking and stuff. It would, then you can just kind of know that they are going to get dinged on that math section only because they just don't know those things. And you may show them ahead of time on a practice test, hey, this is a kind of problem that we haven't gone over yet. It's okay to skip it and mom won't be upset or anything. So that's one thing I would mention. Britta, did I miss anything about Math UC that you wanted to share?
Man, you said almost everything I would have said. Yeah, I mean, I did the same thing you did with, we did A, B, C. I did one day of review, and if they felt confident, then they would take the test on Friday, and then we would just continue on that way. And ending up that way, we did that all year, and we would finish the curriculum before the school year was over. And so this year, with COVID happening, teaching textbooks actually did a free 15 lessons for people that were home, and needed something to do. And so my youngest, he finished Matthew C way early. And so I didn't want to buy the new one yet. And so I was like, well, let's do the 15 lessons. And so it was interesting. We did that. And, there's a placement test just like with Matthew C. And they do the same kind of thing as a video, except you're not looking at a person. You're looking at the screen and it's all animated and they're using blocks and all this stuff. So it was very interesting to see something completely different. So we did the first 15 during COVID. It was interesting. So, but besides that, with Matthew C, we loved it. I think it's great. The videos are awesome. I think there's a little bit too many pages with the reviews. So, picking and choosing was good for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were some days when I was like, well, they need a little more review, but maybe not that much. So we'll do odds or evens, on a page. Lisette asks if anyone knows about Saxon. Amy, did you try that at one point?
We did. So Saxon is what's called a spiral program. There's basically two basic types of math programs. There's mastery, where you focus on one thing for a while and you get to know it really well before you move on to the next thing. And then there's spiral, where they give you kind of a little bit of it and then you move on to something else. And then they give you a little bit of something else and then you move on to something else. And eventually, like 3 lessons later, you'll come back to the thing you learned 3 lessons ago. For some kids, it works great because that constant review helps them remember the math skills they've learned. For some kids, it's awful because they're like, wait, why are they talking about this when we just learned? Like, why are they giving me multiplication problems when we just learned division? And it doesn't work for those kids. My kids were the kids it did not work for. I have taught it before in a school setting, and we did try and use it. I just learned spiral doesn't work for my kids. So Saxon is a spiral program. It is like the gold standard for homeschoolers. It's been around for forever. It is a solid program. Your kids will learn math if you use it. It does have a lot of problems built in. So what a lot of parents who use it do is they'll say, just do the evens or just do the odds, because it's like 60 problems on one page and that's too much. Yeah, I know. I saw your eyes get big. Yeah, it's a lot. So you just need to do about half of those, but you want to do odds or evens because the review problems are mixed up among the page. And so I think like the easier ones are close to the top and the harder ones are at the bottom. I'm not totally sure on that, so don't quote me on that. But you don't want to do like, say, just the top of the page, because then they'd only have the easy ones. You have to do the odds or even so you get the whole span of the page. I think there's a test booklet, so you have tests. Singapore did not have tests. So I think Dimensions has tests, but the standards edition doesn't. But there's reviews and practices built in, so we just use those as our tests. But yeah, so Saxon is spiral. There's a lot of things, so cut it down to odds or evens. It's a solid program. A lot of homeschoolers have used it with great success, but a lot of homeschoolers hate math because of Saxon.
Yes, everyone I've talked to says it is intense because there's so
Yes.
much there. But if you kind of make it more manageable, and I know there's lots of resources, people have created different video lessons or CD-ROMs, videos, programs for
Yeah,
Saxon because it's been around so long to help teach it. Because I know that is another complaint is that some moms don't have the time to teach 4 different maths, especially if it's a very involved lesson like some of Saxon can be, and not quite too simple. So there are lots of resources out there. Dive CD,
Nicole the math lady is
Nicole the
one
Math
too,
Lady.
and she's just started adding grading, I think, this year, which has like made a lot of parents so very happy.
Yeah. So if, the thing I found with math is that if you run into a wall and you feel like it's tricky, try to modify it to work before you just throw it out and switch. Because we did do that once, is we tried to switch because we were struggling so much in the beginning. But it turns out it really wasn't the curriculum as much as it was the kid, and they're just not naturally good at math. So we went back to Math UC because it was the approach that made the most sense to me as a teacher and made the most sense, moving forward. And I saw success and progress. That's how I always determine if a curriculum is working for us. If my kid's learning and we're not, yelling at each other. If there's a positive progress, and not crying too much. I know I tolerate
True. Too
crying.
much.
There has to be
Yes.
some crying, but not every day. So, it's possible to adapt these things as homeschoolers and not go too crazy.
And that was
Excellent.
Nicole, the math lady?
Nicole the math lady.
Oh,
She has
Nicole. Okay.
Nicole, the name. She
Sorry.
has a website and she teaches the lessons for each Saxon book. And I heard this year she started adding grading. And I think she has like a week or a month free trial if you want to see if that works for your kids. But it's probably at her website to see if
Because a lot of the set curriculums, I see Saxon. I hear also
yeah,
people.
because it's been around for forever. It was like the only homeschooled ish math program that was available for a long time, because most of the math programs were made for schools with a teacher guide and the instruction for classroom learning, which doesn't apply when you're teaching one student. It just doesn't work the well. I mean, they have discussion questions and answers you're looking for and ways to do it, but that doesn't work when you have one kid. So Saxon, I don't think it was specifically made for homeschoolers, but it just retrofit homeschoolers really well, and it was the only thing available out there for many, many years.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes,
I'll look
definitely.
into that. Thank you.
Good questions. Well, ladies, before we wrap up, are there other questions that you guys wanted to ask or get feedback on, or things you thought of that you want to share? Not really. They're thinking. I always love doing these calls because we really get to like what you need to hear. We get into some of the nitty gritty. It's really easy to talk in theoreticals, but when we really dig down, these are really helpful to so many people. So.
Yes, and then you read all the comments on Facebook, and it's like, oh, but this is great. So you've been very informative. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. I'm glad that it's helpful. And I thank Amy for being my second hand today, and for Britta jumping on and giving some good feedback. You guys are awesome, Lisette and Jacqueline. If you guys think of other questions, message me or post them in the group and we will get to them. But I'll post this video to the YouTube channel for other people who wanted to come and couldn't. And if you see any questions related to something we talked about, direct people there so that they know that they could get some good tips. Awesome.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, you're so welcome. We're going to do 2 more of these calls next week, focused specifically to mamas who are like brand new, never homeschooled before, and are like, so you're welcome to join us then to get more information. We'll talk about different topics, but this has been really lovely. So thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you so much.